Hello, my name is Russ Timpson. I'm the founder of the Tall Building Fire Safety Network. What you're about to see is a video from our 2025 Tall Building Fire Safety Conference. You can find more other great videos on tall building fire safety on our YouTube channel, and there are many more presentations on our website, www.tallbuildingfiresafety. If you find our videos and presentations useful, please like and subscribe us on our YouTube channel. Halfway through the video, you're going to see details of our 2026 conference, which will take place in May in London. We have a fantastic program, and we also have a separate high-rise firefighting masterclass with Brent Brooks and special guests from around the world. There are also details of our 5-day intensive tall building fire safety management course, which will be running in London throughout 2026, but also in the Mediterranean, in Cyprus and in Malta. This is an ideal course for anybody who's dealing with fire safety matters in tall and complex buildings. So I hope you find these videos useful, and as we say in the Tall Building Fire Safety Network, go high and go well. Thanks.
I'm following those two very digital presentations. This is very analog.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned the golden thread, but I think just
Thanks very much for the invitation. Thanks for that introduction, Amanda. We thought we'd try to get together as a group of almost like a multidisciplinary team, if you like, or design team, to try and understand some of the challenges that we came up with last year, those who were at last year's conference, where we talked about the 2-stair challenge. It became very clear that it's not just about staircases, it's about all the other issues that go along with it, as we call layers of safety. So bringing up to date with where we are, and pretty clearly compartmentation and fire propagation in a building has got to be understood at design stages. So we're trying to think about that in relation to the safe process, and certainly a drill that I went to with Andrew in Brighton showed the sort of complexity of getting the firefighters up a staircase, together with all the equipment that they have to deploy before it's charged up with water, and then when it is charged up with water, how much actually that dynamic bit of hose is actually a major problem with evacuation. Imagine trying to escape down that with your children or your elderly relative, whatever. And certainly we went on the Hereford House MHCLG trial. I don't know if anyone saw that, but getting an evac chair down a staircase with all that going on is not possible. So these are very much the considerations we had about the second staircase. So it's effectively impossible to carry out an evacuation whilst firefighting is going on. And that was what became very clear. And certainly this was also clarified by Paul Grimwood with his RICE principles. Remind me when I get this wrong, Andrew, but it's rescue, intervention, containment and evacuation. Is that right, I think? And that acronym sort of helps the fire brigade deal with what they do and making their decision-making. And it occurred to me that actually this SAFE acronym actually makes sense for what we need to think about as a design process. And just looking at the firefighters going up that staircase here, and on the left-hand side also the twin breaching dry riser, which actually makes a lot of sense, I think, rather than the single breaching dry riser, for those who are familiar with that. But so sort of moving swiftly on, you saw a bit of this earlier, but the painting has come from the photograph, but it's also showing how the fire brigade or firefighters in certain parts of the country work from a bridgehead 2 to 3 floors below the fire floor. And then they're taking these hoses up a staircase, which people above have got to evacuate down past. And not only is there the hoses on the stair, there's also, as we've seen perhaps earlier today, a lot of smoke, quite potentially, because that's those hoses coming in through the door into what is effectively a corridor with flats off it, is propping the door open, and smoke's now going up the staircase, so preventing people to go. And so there's a conflict here of the design where should that dry riser be? Should it be on that staircase? We all see them there, but because that in a way suits the firefighting process, but it contradicts the means of escape. And I think some fire authorities, tell me if I'm wrong, work from the fire floor rather than the bridgehead below. So there's various approaches across the country. And certain of this also comes from looking at some of the legislation, whereas, I mean, this diagram in here, diagram 52, I think it's from the ADB, is it not, Andrew? It's showing actually a dry riser for shafts serving flats on the right-hand side in the staircase, but there's no lobby. On the other one, it says any building, which I assume includes residential as well. If it's got a lobby, it's best in the lobby. So, you know, actually, we had that sort of discussion in the background at last year's conference. And what is the benefit? I noticed in 9991, for care homes, it's suggested being in the lobby, but for other flats, it's in the staircase. So we've got, as we heard from the BS talk this morning, there's discrepancies in regulation or recommendations and guidance, as we all know. So trying to avoid, certainly, these hoses on the stair, I think, is a fundamental issue. And this is all the sort of kit, and I'm sure the firefighters know that they're carrying all this up, and there's female firefighters also carrying this stuff up, and then they're deploying it. There's these pressure PPVs, and they're often carried by the individual teams on their engines, but certainly helping assist air movement by that version. It won't pressurise the whole staircase, but it will help smoke movement. And that is something we don't actually see on the drawings. You do not see which way the smoke's going or which way the air's going. So we've got to start thinking about, in drawn terms, and this little section diagram top left is showing someone running away towards the staircase, but the smoke's going away from them towards the smoke shaft. And there's a positive pressurisation in the staircase helping that to work. Not full pressurisation, but possibly a positive pressurisation fan. But that seems to make sense, that you're actually moving away from the way the smoke could go. And anyone who knows Grenfell knows that the vents were near the staircase, so the smoke was coming towards the staircase the way you're supposed to go. And listening to the Jim Glockling this morning, the toxicity of that smoke is a major issue. So how far can you travel in that circumstance? There's various other issues about stack effects and roof vents. I won't go into those. But we all know that, frankly, every tower block or every home for multiple occupancy is essentially a care home without the 24-hour supervision. You've got elderly people here who are released from hospital early, or they've had an operation. They're not very mobile. How are they going to evacuate given these other conditions, as well as young children or anyone who's had a recent accident in their sports field? So looking at architects historically, we've drawn a refuge 1400 by 900 on the landing. I don't know I'd like to sit in that, to be perfectly honest, given a firefighting operation going on, and that having a better refuge has got to be the process. And we've certainly had a lot of discussion about fire stopping as being a major problem in the industry from the point of view that compartmentation ideally is sorted out by a plan of a diagram showing the performance requirements of the passive fire resistance. But the fire stopping issue is a much bigger project and needs to have information probably provided a lot further down the line in terms of the process by which buildings are designed. It could actually affect the floor-to-floor ceiling heights to get all these services together with their separation zones in a corridor, for example. So it has a major effect even back on the planning stage of a building. So this is how the design team have to consider planning, strategic fire design, as I call it, and then detailed fire design. And that comes into a problem with the gateway system, which I might touch on. This is the sort of information that we put together at the RIBA after Grenfell to try and understand. The right-hand side, you've got the Grenfell core and showing the smoke vents, which are actually towards the staircase, albeit it was only 9.2 metres, I think, but people expired in that distance. So actually 9.2 metres to a staircase is quite a challenge in smoke-filled, toxic smoke environment. So we're looking at trying to remediate it with a bottom diagram and getting this intermediate lobby with a dry riser in that lobby rather than on the staircase. And we've got option A and option B. I think option B is preferable, but we don't want too many doors because people complain about the luggage and the baby and the pram and the rest of it. But we've got to weigh those up with evacuation capabilities as well, and closing off the smoke-filled corridor, which goes straight onto a flat. And Andrew will talk more about that. But on the left-hand side, what we tried to do, you can't read it, but you might be able to see it later, but it's capturing the legislation at the time that was there when Grenfell was being designed. It was built in 1976, if I'm not mistaken, but obviously it was designed before that, so the legislation, CP3 I think it was relevant. But as was mentioned this morning, there was a waiver on the second staircase. So all these things have kind of evolved, and we ended up with Grenfell. And the second line is about Lacanel and trying to understand why that only had one staircase as well. So then moving across the right of that diagram, we're looking at how we could remediate existing buildings and design new buildings, because that is the big challenge to us all currently. Down the middle, we're talking about trying to understand the storyboard about Grenfell, Lacanel, what the current regulations say, but they're not mandatory. 2 staircases, not mandatory. Even next September, they're not going to be mandatory. But I think everyone's realising they're necessary. But there are still outliers who don't, and they're perfectly entitled to have that view. So that's a bit of the problem of our legislation. So we're trying to balance all these issues with remedial works, particularly in new buildings. And this is the sort of diagram we've sort of tried to come up with, showing how we could remediate an existing building, perhaps, and there's an option A or an option B, staircases and additional corridors, whatever. But that's going to be a big upheaval to any existing building. And we're looking at down the right-hand side a list of other layers of safety we can add to compensate for the one staircase that's in the middle of a building. Can we introduce that refuge lobby in green? Can we move the dry riser? All these things are possible, but might probably need decanting of the whole occupancy. So NFCCC, who I understand are here this afternoon, but great, they supported the RIBA, particularly in terms of the 2 staircase proposal. Bottom one here, I think various other ones, getting approved document rewritten, approved document B, which is ongoing at the moment. But down the bottom it also talks about the government should make it a requirement to retrofit sprinklers in all residential buildings over 18 metres, which I think is still, I don't think that's there yet. But certainly we were looking at retrofitting sprinklers is a major upheaval to an occupied building. So we're looking at the smoke control issues, which were more in the public areas, the common parts, and I would suggest easier to update. But we know from Grenfell, we had lots of challenges with smoke systems, which smoke control systems designed poorly, didn't work when it came to it, or were mechanically broken down when they're required. So they all have these issues with an active fire system. Although I know 9991 assumes it'll all work. I don't think the world is quite like that, but I'm not an engineer, and an architect would say that, wouldn't they? But I think things do break down, particularly in social housing, whereby there's not a big budget. So stay put with single stairs or total evacuation with 2 stairs and smoke control is very much what we're trying to sort of look at. And again, this is the Grenfell core, proposed updates, just showing how in a single staircase building, you've got a major conflict with the bridgehead, hoses going up 2-3 flights, got the fire floor with smoke going up the staircase because the hose is bridging the door. People above can't escape down. People below are struggling to escape because the fire brigade are coming up as well. So the section really helps to prove that single staircase is a problem. Even putting in refuges and evacuation lifts, that might help, but it's still a major problem with a single staircase building. You might have a sort of another option of going up to the roof, which some people did try at Grenfell, but it didn't work because it was locked or whatever, and would that be suitable? So looking at enhanced single staircase or actually adding the second staircase, you still got this congestion and the same issues unless we can get the fire brigade to change their approaches on the staircase. But we've actually got options to go horizontally, as you would in a hospital, to transfer progressive horizontal evacuation, I think is the term, where you would go through this red line into another zone and then can escape down the other staircase. And I think even if the staircases are together, you can still have that propensity. And there's sort of additional layers we can add of compartmentation, of even fire floors being increased, etc. Other layers we can add. If you can get sprinklers in there, all the better. Certainly a new build, it makes more sense, but retrofitting, more of a problem. So we've got more alternatives to evacuate is crucial here. And these were just some of the diagrams that we've tried to put together to understand that process. And it might well be on the right-hand side, longer term, if we've got to have, as has been very much used, internal staircases, which, as Andrew was sort of saying earlier, back in the day, they were on external walls because they could be naturally ventilated. And certainly there might be a way to actually reintroduce that as well in new builds. But there's issues about net lettable areas and all these other issues. So I think it sort of comes to the end of my bit here. Just one thing has occurred to us under the new 9991. These travel distances are being massively increased. And Andrew will explain that a bit later. But by putting 2 staircases in, they seem to have been compensated by 135 metres, did we decide, Andrew? Long corridors with...
90 between stairs.
Okay, so, but then extended single direction travel distance either end of the stairs, which was that the intention of the updated BS, which we hear is going to be revised anyway.